So the easiest way to look at managing collections within your ASP.NET MVC app is to basically start with a collection of something. So in my case, I figured users and user management would be our easiest thing to kind of manage and work on. So how do we go about taking a collection of something and putting it on the page, and then manipulating that collection of something, and then ultimately posting back from that collection? So what I'm going to do is I'm jumping into my database table for user, and I'm just going to go in and key in, I'm just going to key in some additional users. All right, so I just set up a few users. And really, you can put in whatever you want if you're following along. But what I'm doing here is I'm establishing a collection. I'm trying to build a collection of something so that I can then bind that or push that to my view. So using my user collection, I'm going to jump into my project and start to build that out. So I'm going to create a new controller that's called user management. So right-clicking on my controllers, add, new controller, and I'm going to go ahead and go with an empty one. And I'll call this user manager controller. So I have this basic controller with an index action, default. And what I want to do is I'm going to set up a series of different actions and views that I want to be able to present. So my index, I want to be able to go myapp.com/user-manager, and I want it to list all of the users in my system. So this first index screen will be a list of my users. So if you remember from last week, we set up under our models, we have our project DB context. That context is used to actually link and pull project data from our database so that we have our models, our DTOs, our data transfer objects. We created those classes. And then we created this context to link between those models and our database. And that acts as that conduit between the two. So we're going to use that context to go and fetch all of the users and pull them out of the database and put them into our view ultimately. So I'll start off with using project DB context, and then I'll use my accelerator and add the using statement. I'll just call that DB. So I have a new instance of my context. And then from here, I just want to get all of my users. I'm going to say var user DTOs. So once this code runs, user DTOs, the variable, will have a collection of my users. Now, as I've said before, you always want to create a view model for your view. And really what we want to do is we want to pump that view model. We want to populate the view model and send it to the view. We don't want to send our data transfer objects directly to the view. So to do that, we'll have to go under Models, and then right-click, add a new class, and we'll call this our User Manager View Model. And inside of here, we'll just set up a series of properties to mimic our DTO. So we'll do prop string username, prop string first name, last name, email address. And I'm not going to worry so much with the password because I'm not actually going to show the password on the screen. So now we have this view model that mimics our data transfer object or database object. And then inside of our controller, we'll do that mapping of pushing data from one into the other. Now, if you remember, that using statement has those curly brackets, so there's a limited scope of the variables that are declared within those curly brackets. So basically any variable that's declared inside of it has to be used, or it'll get lost once we get past the curly brackets. And in my case, my return view is after the curly brackets. Now you could say, well, just move that line inside the curly brackets, but the goal here is for you to understand scope and give you a little bit of a hint into garbage collection without me going into all of the detail. So my list of my view model needs to be declared before my using statement in order for me to have it when I get to the end. So I'm going to call it user VM. And that's of type list of user manager view model. So it's a list or a collection of user manager view model. Now, one of the things that's nice about the entity framework, or what are referred to as the link functions, is that you actually have more than just where clauses and first, if you remember this from last week, or any. You actually can do in code using your objects sub-selects, just like you would in SQL. So in SQL, you could do select star from user, and that would give you every column and every row inside the users table. And that may not be relevant. Maybe you only need first name, last name, email, and username. You don't care about the rest. Well, you can do the equivalent of a sub-select or a custom selection inside of .NET. And you can do that by taking our query variable, and that's what user DTOs really is. It's hard to see on the screen here, but it says that what this user DTOs actually is a DB set of user data transfer objects. And you can run sub-selects off of that collection. We could actually forego this variable entirely and just work directly off of our DB context. And we get the same set of functionality there. Just for simplicity, I like to kind of break it into chunks. So user DTOs, and then I can do a select. And a select takes one of those lambda expressions, the thing with the arrow. And what it allows us to do is we can say select, and we can select just one value out of that entire table. We could say just give me the email addresses. And then I could say, well, let's actually do that. Let's do a more simplified version for a minute. I don't have to comment that out, but let's do a string array of email addresses. So let's say I just want email addresses. So from my DB context, I go in and I say grab all the users, and then I say select from users email addresses, and take that collection of email addresses and convert it into an array. And that basically returns me a string array of all the email addresses out of my users table. So now email addresses is literally just an array of strings, a collection of strings, and I can send those to my view. So to pass the object to the view, we pass it as a parameter to the view function. And then that collection will then get picked up on the other side when we actually get to the view. So I'm going to go ahead and right click, add view. And it'll be called index, and I'll leave my model as empty for now. And I'll click add. So I get a basic view layout, nothing fancy, no templating. And at the top, I'm going to add my model declaration. So I'm saying that the model for this view is a string array, because I'm passing that email addresses variable, which is just an array of strings, to this view. So from within this view, I can start with an ampersand and write C# code. So I can do something as simple as for each string address in, and that array, when it gets passed into the view, it goes into the model's property, or model property. If you're kind of thinking, where's model come from? Think of this page as a class, and you can do this dot model. So model is a property of our view. So when that view function is called in our action, MVC has some interesting plumbing where that collection, that array, gets picked up by the controller, it gets passed to the view then creates its own class, and then that array gets stored in the model property of the view class, basically. And then you have access to it on this side. So think of it like passing a parameter. You're passing the model in to the view class, or into the view function, however you want to think of it. So from here, we can spit out each one of those email addresses. Now, that's not very pretty, there's not a lot of formatting to it, so we can actually put some HTML markup around this to make it a little more easy to read. So that will give us an unordered list of email addresses. So I'll save that. And I'll hit play. And there's our email addresses.